Hi, everybody. Oh, get situated here. Oh. So, this is kind of a hodgepodge video, at least in my mind. I just wanted to talk about a couple of topics that have come up in the group. And the first one is pure perception. Actually, I want to go to my phone and bring up a couple of things just to read. Fleur was asking about seeing. She said, I'd love to hear more about true seeing. And I want to say something first, and then I'm going to read. Hey, Martha. Ooh. And I'm going to read this quote again because I think it's really good. So true seeing is not just about vision and sight. It's about all of the centers of perception and way of receiving information being clear. So it doesn't have just to do with vision. It has to do with hearing and kinesthetic sensation, empathy, feeling, like all the quality, all the ways that you get information, knowing, hearing, seeing, feeling. Must be missing something. Those ways, whether they're in meditation and you're picking up information, or it's, I see that door over there. I just heard a sound downstairs in the basement. All the ways that we receive information, is that are those pathways of perceiving, are they clear and free of identity and free of separation, is really what it is? Or are there filters between the experience of me and what is being perceived? When there are no filters, that's true perception. I'm going to read this quote now. I posted it in the group, but I feel like it's good to go back to it. So this comes up in Carlos Castaneda's book, and Don Juan, his teacher, talks about this a lot. It's because it's key, it's foundational, key experience to look for or to move into during the awakening process. Don Juan's existential man seeks to relate directly to the world without the intermediary world construct. So relating directly with the world without the intermediary construct, that's you. The sense of you in separation is what creates this intermediary world construct. It's what makes the construct, the world, a construct or a paradigm or a framework, as opposed to simply being what it is. And it means that there's someone relating with the world. There's someone engaging with a construct, and that's how you see the separation. He wants to experience the world directly without thought or language, which normally continuously reinforce the world construct by presenting one with preconceptions taught to one since infancy. In order to achieve this experience, one must stop thought and thus the flow of preconceptions. So, what they're pointing to in this quote is that you need to go preconceptual. So in order to experience the world directly via the senses, you have to go before the senses actually come into existence within yourself. And that is preconceptual. That's a lot of times when we're working with preconceptual identity in the womb, there's the clarification of the senses that's happening through that process. So when you go before the senses and notice any separation there, anything that clears, and this is first arising of awareness, really, because after the awareness, or as the awareness arises, when it's arising in separation, all the separation between the first arising of awareness and what it's arising from is fodder for the creation of the world. So any separation within myself there is going to be reflected back to me within the world that I've created. And the reflection back is the process of the senses, or sensing. This is an important topic. I just want to make sure that I go slow enough and kind of hit several key things. But let me just continue reading. One must stop thought and thus the flow of preconceptions. You have to go before thought in order to stop thought. Since all life is experience, then the highest quality experiences, direct experiences of the world or reality, are most desirable. From these experiences, knowledge is gained. They have knowledge in quotes. What they actually means, the way I read that is charge is gained. Power is gained. The wisdom gained through mystical experiences, the Jnana Swarupa, or perfect experience of consciousness in Vedanta. Don Juan's man of knowledge is the idea of the existential man. The direct experience is called seeing by Don Juan. It entails responding to the perceptual solicitations of a world outside the description we have learned to call reality. So the information that's being received through the senses is directly experienced at the fundamental nature of what it is, without any translation put on top of it. It entails responding to the perceptual solicitations of a world outside the description we have learned to call reality, which requires a stopping of thought. If you're thinking, then you're basically there's a translation on what's being received, right? The thinking is kind of like making things mean stuff, or putting information into conceptual frameworks or categories or boxes. That's when it exits true perception, pure perception. This experience, therefore, is very close to that of superconsciousness in yoga or Vedanta, wherein thought ceases and the world fades away. This state of consciousness is also seemingly akin to Zen Satori enlightenment, Buddhist samadhi. Yes, and the way that they've said that, it can seem like what they're saying is that you're moving away from the world. And at first you do. So in the process of cultivating true perception, there has to be a moving away from the world so that you can see the part of you that's identified with the world, right? Hey, Sarah. So the aspect of you that is identified with the world that is being created at the first arising of awareness, in order to clear that, you have to go pre-thought, pre-conceptual, before the senses, pre-sensory, okay? When you do that, you're going into the bindu in the very center of the Sri Yantra. And that is, it. Practically speaking, it is thought ceases and the world fades, okay? Thought ceases and the world fades as there is a becoming. It's not the awareness moves in first. It can be the awareness moves in to the absolute, which is that center dot in the Sri Yantra, right? But then the awareness eventually lets go of itself, or you could say there is a pre-awareness experience, and that pre-awareness experience is the absolute. There is no one experiencing it. It's the absolute, right? But then that's retreating into the center of the Sri Yantra. There has to be an explosion back out again into the world, let's say, okay? So when that realization happens and the explosion comes back out again, and every layer of the explosion is in unification, let's go about it in a practical, slow way. So there is the absolute, then the absolute forms the awareness, but there's no separation between the two. So when there's no separation between the two, the experience of progression goes away. It's like the awareness was always there, and it's totally infused with absolute, which is always there. Okay, that we're doing this in layers, right? So when that happens, there is no thought yet. You're still before thought. Now, moving to the next level of complication or complexity, let's say, you start to move into the experience of the senses. When the awareness and the senses are in some level of separation, what is seen is going to be a projection of that separation. This is really important. When you think you're seeing another person, if you have any level of separation between the absolute and the first arising of awareness, you are going to see a projection of your own separation appearing as them. When you take that same person and there's unification at the level of absolute and the first arising of awareness, then there's a direct experience of the other person without filters. So then you can actually experience them as their uniqueness. And you're also experiencing yourself as your uniqueness, because the two go hand in hand, right? When this is full, that is enlightenment. So going into the bindu and having just the absolute, that's self-realization. That's for me. This is how I use the terms, right? Self-realization is the realization that fundamentally at the base of any experience of being that I can have, there is simply absolute, unknowable, no thing. Most of us tend to identify first with the awareness, and then the awareness can identify with form, let's say, for example. But we're mostly identified with awareness, right? Or mind. This would be the greater level of mind. And mind then goes to create the body and creates the world that we're engaging with. So when the absolute is realized, which means there's simply an experience of absolute without awareness, without any level of form, zero, not airy, misty, light levels of form. There's no thing that can be there, right? No shape, no sensory experience, nothing. It's kind of hard to, there can be pure experience as it, but if you put the awareness on top of that, then it looks like there's someone experiencing it. If the awareness, if you're there without the awareness, then there's just the absolute. So that's the realization of the self, okay? Enlightenment is the complete and total embodiment of what's in the center of the bindu in the Sri Yantra, or the absolute self. In order to achieve that embodiment, it happens in progressions. Once you've been into the center of the bindu, progressions outward. The first level outward is awareness. The second level outward, this is very simplistic. There's technical details I'm missing. Second level outward, you start to hit the senses, and the awareness realizes, oh geez, information, when I'm perceiving information, it's actually a reflection back to me of what's separate at the source. When that separation at the source is completely unified, all the senses clarify, and there's only direct experience of the world. And there's also no separation between you and the world. So, I feel like I want to give an example. Oh, Sarah's commenting on what I'm saying. Let's get some, I need to kind of work myself into some practical examples. So one of the things that I notice occurs, or there's a contrast between these two states, like pure perception versus regular perception, I don't know how you want to term that, is in the regular perception, there's a lot of meaning attached to what's happening. Oh, this person is doing this thing, and that means ta-da. Or there's reflection on what's happening. Gee, let me reflect on, in our community here in Asheville, it's really beautiful. It's actually also important, but there's this tendency when we're sharing to share our reflections, and it is important in one way, and also those reflections, the capacity to reflect on yourself or to reflect on another person's actions, just is gone. There is no reflection. It's like happen, gone, happen. So it's really, but you can actually kind of fake a reflection from that. Gone, happen. So that's my practice as I'm reflecting in the groups of people that I get together with, and we have these like bonding experiences, sharing with one another. I have to go into reflection, immediate, spontaneous, what looks like reflecting, but it's actually just all occurring to me now. So that's one of the things that I notice in contrast. I'm interested too, if you guys have an experience of one and the other, and things that you want to share about what it's like when your experience of true perception is there or something else is there, then let me know. Another thing I can think about is in dreams. So you know, there's certain qualities of dreams and dreaming where there are characters in your dream or something's happening in your dream, and you can tell that you're engaging with people who you might know in the real world, but they're showing up in ways that are kind of not how they would normally show up, or there's a slight twist on them or something. Um, there's if you feel into those certain kinds of dreams, you can actually sense how these people in your dreams are projections of them. And it can be when you have intimate experiences with people in dreaming space, it can feel like they're actually showing up and engaging with you. And that, you know, just traveling people with people for so long in this group, I'm aware that that can happen for us. I had this dream about these people. That means it's real, basically, or those people are an actual reflection of their uniqueness, but they're showing up as projections of our own consciousness. And because it's in the dream space, it's easier to feel because dream space is already so fluid and kind of seemingly unreal or movie-like. But we're doing the same thing in our conscious state when we're engaging with people. We're seeing them, but they're actually projections of our own consciousness. Reflection technique, when reflection technique is taken to the deepest level, the whole point of that is to allow true perception of another person, whether that's what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're feeling in your body when you're listening to them or in their presence. And this is related to the post that I just made on my wall, on my personal wall, about being with people. Most of the time I'm not reflecting on how they are, what state they're in, or what they look like, or whatever. There's just this constant, and it's kind of hard to explain because that's our baseline for how we learned to perceive things, is through separation. But when that's not there, it's just a flowing, constant play of consciousness that's happening. And there's no separation between me or the other person, me or the other people, me and the chair, me and the elements in the room. It's all just, oh, it's like the blanket. Have you guys seen I Heart Huckabees? Amazing, funny movie. I Heart Huckabees, the way Dustin Hoffman tries to explain it. He's kind of in the teacher role to this young guy who's just starting on the path, and he takes a blanket and he goes, and here's your lover, and here's a piece of cake, and here's a rock, and here's a whatever. It's all just the blanket. So that's kind of how it is, except it's not dull, like just this difference it's all like much more colorful than that. So yeah, I feel like I could say much more about pure perception, but nothing is really coming to me at the moment. Any sharings that you guys have now or in the future, I'm sure we'll continue the conversation between us. So I look forward to that. Now, one of the other things I want to talk about is the gene keys. So for those of you who don't know, here's the book, The Gene Keys by Richard Rudd. And to be honest with you, I know very little about it. Like Sarah, who's on this video right now, and I'm happy, Sarah, if you can explain some of the technicalities about what it is and how it's set up and so on. Because I think that would be helpful for context for people. I want to just share a particular way that it comes up in when I'm working with people. But the gene keys is kind of a part of human design as far as I understand it. And Richard Rudd has taken kind of reorganized aspects of human design to show how our DNA expresses itself when it's in separate, this is in my words, how our DNA expresses itself when we're in separation versus when we're in unification, full unification or partial unification. I think the way he describes it, I brought up a description here. It's a system, basically. It's a system for looking into yourself. Oh, hold on. I don't know what I did now. All right, let's see. Richard Rudd suggests that humanity is on the verge of a major shift in consciousness rooted in a new understanding of how our genes operate. He introduces this fantastic possibility, showing how the gene keys are an inner language designed to transform our core beliefs about ourselves and raise us to a higher level of awareness. The book works alongside state-of-the-art online profiling software that provides instantaneous free hologenetic profiles. So that's what Martha was talking about, Leonora, when she was referring to getting your chart done. You can, if you look up the gene keys online, you can get your chart for free. And your chart looks like this. That's the black and white version, so it's kind of not very visible. But basically it shows different aspects of yourself in relationship to different categories. So the first one is your life's work. The first one up top, for example. And then this is where I don't really know the details of it. And Sarah knows much more than I do in these details. But for me, it kind of, I mean, it's interesting, but I don't need to know how the whole thing works in order to work with it in process, in the way that we work, or when I'm supporting someone else. What I need to know is, if you look at each one, so let's look at my life's work is 23, okay? And you can go, this is the book that describes each gene key. So there's a shadow of this particular gene key, and the shadow is complexity. There's the gift, which is simplicity, and there's the siddhi, which is quintessence, right? So the shadow is how the gene expresses, and it's not just your gene, right? Because it's, the gene is like moving your body, and so it's the state of being. How that particular quality expresses when there's separation. And you can track that back to first arising of awareness if you want to do that. So complexity, okay? Then out of the complexity is simplicity, okay? So when you start to explore, or let's put it this way, because you're not always going to be in the shadow part of it, right? There'll be times when the gift is showing through you and being presented through you. So there are times when I can be really complex, and then there's times when I can make things really simple. And that's without any healing or whatever. Sometimes I'm in unification, high level of unification, and sometimes I'm in separation, depending on if I'm triggered or what's happening in my life, etc. Okay? When that gift is, oh, this is the way that I look at it. I'm sure you guys can add to this. When that gift is at its highest potential, there's the siddhi. And the siddhi is quintessence. So you can see how there's simplicity, but when the simplicity collapses to one point, like the simplest version, that is the quintessential aspect, is the city, right? So I can make things simple, and that's a gift to the world. But when that simplification completely unifies, like if there's any tiny bit of separation left in the experience of simplicity and all that separation is bridged, then what I'm sharing with you is absolutely fundamental, the essence of fundamental, whether that's myself or a particular topic I'm tuning into or the way I clean my house, which has not reached quintessence yet. So this is an example, and you can follow along with each one of your things in your own chart. So what happens when I'm working with this with somebody? Usually they come in, and if they have the gene keys as the framework for their own, like they're working with the gene keys, right? Then they might say, oh, I want to explore gene key 23. And we can do that in lots of different ways. I can say, okay, let's look at the moments in your life where you recognize, and he explains in here, right? I gave the city, the gift, and the shadow, but then he spends the whole chapter for each key explaining what that is. He explains what complexity is in relationship to the gene keys, and then simplicity, and then quintessence. Okay, so let's say I read the complexity part, and I go, oh yeah, I totally recognize when I do that. So for example, at various points in my work, some of you have even been with me in those times, things got really complex. And then it got really complex because the whole creation is accessible and makes itself apparent when you're doing this work, right? So I was suddenly flooded with like, oh my God, from Earth to center of the universal sun and everything in between, there's all this information that we have to address within ourselves. And that's really complex. And I tried to do that for a while. I tried to address every single thing out there. But then as I did that, that was what I saw. I saw it as all complex, but I engaged with the complexity and I just let things be complex. As I did that, they simplified themselves just by being present with the complexity and my experience of complexity. They started to simplify themselves until now it's simplified so much that I can break down my work into two elements and the unification of two complete elements when I'm sharing that with somebody. And when I share it, I can tell that it's the quintessence of what I'm doing on a general level because I can see the person responding in a way that's, wow, oh, I get that. I can feel it hitting the deep quintessence of their own being. So I feel like I went off on a tangent. Okay, so let's say I want to explore one of those, right? So I go, everything feels really complex when I start to think about taxes. That's true for me, but let's just use that as an example. I start to think about, okay, I have to do my taxes this year. I have no idea where to start. There's all this information. I don't know what to do. That is what Richard Rudd's pointing to in my gene key for my life's work. So when I start to delve into that within myself, I'm also clarifying my life's purpose, my life's work. So I can bring up any situation that feels complex, and then I could start to feel into my body and do the thing, right? All the physical sensations, all the qualities of the activity, the stillness, anything keeping them separate, identity work, exploring in the womb, going into first arising of awareness, going into the core of the heart, wherever you're led through that process. And what I've noticed is there's lots of different ways you can jump in and explore these. If you start with the shadow, when there's separation, you will have the experience of complexity. As they start to come together, it will simplify, or the gift will begin to make itself apparent. And then when that unification is complete, the state of being that is related to the city, the word that he uses for the city will describe the state of being of complete unification there. Which also means it's an expression of your own essence, right? It's the gift is already the expression of your essence to some extent. And then the city is the ultimate expression of your essence. So once I have a flavor of the unification, then I can feel simplicity and complexity together with stillness. And when I'm feeling simplicity, or the gift and the shadow together, because that's the same as feeling unification and what's not yet unified together with the absolute, it will perpetuate the unification until the ultimate unification is reached. And when the ultimate unification is reached, because there's no separation between you, the state of being, and stillness, or the absolute, the greatest level of absolute. And in that case, you are expressing the city, the embodied expression of your essence. So your chart here has all these different points in your life where you can, like, how you evolve, how you relate, your life's purpose. And as you explore each one of these, you're unlocking the cities, so that eventually there's just city all the time, which is the same thing as saying that your complete essence is fully expressing 100% all the time. Your absolute uniqueness is in constant full expression. It's the same thing as saying there's complete unification between emptiness and form in relationship to you and your uniqueness. It also comes up a lot in just you don't have to be exploring it explicitly. Like, the reason that I saw immediately how the gene keys work is because this is how, when I'm working with someone and they move from separation to unification, this gene keys system is an exact reflection of that. So in theory, like, let's say there are more gene keys than what he mentioned, you could track them simply by noticing yourself in separation and what that's like in full unification, and write down the qualities of the state in full unification. When I worked with Grant, that's what he was doing, basically. Grant is my teacher when I worked with peak states of consciousness. So he started an institute called the Institute for the Peak States of Consciousness, which is still around. And he wrote a book, which I think there were 45 at the time that he was writing down, but he was writing down peak abilities and peak states of consciousness. And his exploration was, what trauma do you need to heal in order to get the peak state of consciousness? It's almost the exact same thing. Too bad he as far as my judgment goes, he doesn't have the true perception there yet, which kind of convolutes what he's created. But nonetheless, I found it very valuable. So you could map abilities to this as well. When he was mapping abilities, he was mapping things like X-ray vision and, kind of esoteric city abilities, you could probably do the same thing with this, with the gene keys if you wanted to. So what's my point? My point is I was actually talking about how we can just be in a session. Someone could know about the gene keys but not be exploring them directly. Or maybe they don't even know about the gene keys. And the way that the session flows can be completely matched to the gene keys. So I can be sitting with someone and we're working with, let's say we're working with conflict they're having with their child. And the conflict that they're having with their child, the experience that we first start to explore can be related to a shadow, the way that Richard Rudd talks about the shadow. The quality of that shadow and what that shadow looks and feels like. And then as the process goes and the unification happens, the gift is there. And sometimes they'll say to me, oh my God, this is just like my gene key, whichever gene key. And then they can relate the process to the book and the system of the gene keys. So, like I said, I feel like what I have to offer there is kind of very specific and about process and the way that process flows. There are other people who know much more about the system of the gene keys themselves. And I'm happy if people want to share about that on the thread, because I think it's really interesting, and it's one of the many tools that we use. I want to say something explicitly because I feel like it's important. And that is, I encourage us to use any tool together with this practice that you feel called to do, because what we're doing is the foundational, to me, it's foundational to everything that we're exploring, whether that's relationship, like in every moment, whatever comes up in your life, what we're doing is providing a way to explore that experience foundationally. So if you like ecstatic dance or yoga or the gene keys or engineering or body work, whatever lights your fire, bring that in. Bring what we're doing into that and combine them. And then offer it to other people because it's useful. It's useful to do that. And there are lots of different ways to bring people back to the fundamental aspect of themselves. So that's why I like working with healers, because they do that. Healers and yeah, I mean, I even have businessmen. I even have businessmen who are doing this and bringing it into their conference meetings or whatever. So do I have comments? Sorry. Sometimes it's, I don't see the comments till later because they like join, or they I don't see them unless I scroll. Sarah says, the biggest thing that highlights is the integration between shadow and light, and what I love is going into the Venus sequence specifically and the childhood, and really integrating how your childhood experience was perfect catalyst for embodying your essence, right? So I think what's important about and the union of simplicity and complexity. So what Sarah is pointing to is this is a whole conceptual framework, which is kind of like a masculine thing, right? The masculine comes in and goes, let's do it like this. And what we're doing is very feminine as far as the foundational. It's the water path, right? We're surrendering. That's the foundational thing. And it's useful to have the masculine come in and go, let's do the surrendering like this, and let's apply it here, and let's apply it there, and let's apply it there, so that we can get eventually to all the aspects within ourselves. And this is a good system for doing that. So he has other books too, like the Venus sequence, and if I remember correctly, that's about relationships and how to use the gene keys to explore your own self in relationship. The spheres and the gene keys to the planetary system. Richard Rudd suggests reading the chart starting at life's work, then moving through the spheres. She means, these are the spheres, right? They're black and white now, but they'll normally be in color when you go and look at it. Then moving through the spheres. Although the process obviously isn't linear, it's just really helpful for the mind to have the sequence, right? It's the mind that needs this conceptual framework to work within. Just like any other system, we can use it to serve identity. Right, serve identity as in allow the identity that's separate to become unified. Moving from suffering to lack of suffering and magical expression. Is there anything anybody wants to say or share on this topic? Or maybe you want to, I've been going for 45 minutes now. I guess it's probably enough. As far as one video goes. But given that this is a hodgepodge, I could also include something else. I'm really, there's 5 people watching. That's awesome. I really like to have I'm going to start announcing more the times when I'm doing these so that there's more opportunity for people to come on and join, because I feel like that adds, it's much better when there's a conversation, like a living conversation. It's not just me like talking to nobody or talking to somebody later. So if you have, I say this every video, and I'm going to say it again, if there are things that you want to bring up in relationship to pure perception or working with the gene keys, then feel free to comment on the thread. We can continue the conversation. I see that nobody's commenting. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe there's something here. Oh, see, I got to scroll. You guys got to remind me to scroll. I want to share about touching into awareness. Okay. You should do that, Sarah. Touching into awareness in relationship to the gene keys, you mean? Or you want me to share about touching it? I didn't understand that. I want to share about touching into awareness. It's all clear and it's hodgepodge, says Martha. How would you approach being the witness or awareness related to working with the shadows and the gifts? Good question. So I would go into first arising of awareness doing that. And I think we've demonstrated that in lots of different ways by now in the videos, but let me just talk about one way, and you can know that there's different ways. Okay, so one of the things that's come up recently as I've been exploring with people is I will ask them where the awareness is in relationship to their body, and it will be someplace that's not the head, in or around the head, which is fine. You start wherever it is, but somewhere in the process of becoming the awareness with the absolute and surrendering, you will or should end up in the head. And it's actually important to do that because I've noticed chunks of the process where I wasn't letting the awareness be in the head. And so it was missing the experience of being in the head and being able to include that aspect, right? So if you're working with the gene keys and let's say you're bringing in the shadow, you're starting to experience the shadow of a particular gene key. The shadow is just a state of being, right? So you want to bring on that state of being by moving into something that triggers you into that state of being. So for me, it's complexity if I'm looking at the life's work. So I would bring on, let's use the tax thing. It's tax season. Oh my God, it's all so complex. I cannot even know where to begin. What do I feel in my body? And then immediately after you've gotten all of the sensory information, I'm going to tune into not just who's the one saying that, but where is the observer or the one noticing the experience of complexity in relationship to my body. At first, that might not be the head, but for me, it is in the head when I feel into it. It's actually kind of in the back of the head behind all of this like rubbish stuff everywhere, which is the complexity, right? So a lot of times what we're doing is we get lost in the complexity. When we start this process or in the state, all the things that are happening. But when you're looking in the first arising of awareness, you're going to allow yourself to inhabit the perspective of the one noticing the complexity. When I do that, I move into the back of my head and I'm kind of sitting back there and I notice this grand field of things that feel really big and overwhelming and unorganized. It's like just unorganized. And I'm sitting back as the awareness and I'm watching what this is. And for me, the quality of the awareness, the way I experience it, I can tell is the witness because it's transparent and it's only a point because I experience it in relationship to this grand field. So I'm just going to be that, and I'm going to let go of the field. Instead of being in the field, trying to process the whole field, which is oftentimes how we can start, right? Instead of being in the field, I'm processing the whole field and all the physical sensations that go with it. I'm going to let go of the field because when I'm the pure witness, I don't feel the sensations. They don't feel related to me at all. They just feel like they're over there and they're not me. So I'm going to let myself have that experience, right? And being the witness there, this transparentness that's noticing the field of complexity, I'm going to turn back or just turn away from the complexity and just be the one noticing the complexity with the deepest level of stillness that I have available. For me, I call that the absolute. So as I'm doing that, there's just the witness and absolute as the complexity is here. So I noticed a shift. So when this happens, for me, it's like a reset. It just goes, and something's changed. That's all I know. That's all that's apparent is like, oh, there's some reset. And now I notice that the complexity, what was in front of me, is different. And it's not there anymore. There's something happening down the front of my body and then kind of going into a field below me. And when I look out in space, I actually don't see anything. And all I see is what is there, which is the window. The window and the trees that are outside the window and the fog. But there's no thought about it. This is great because it actually comes back to pure perception. There's no thought about the windows and trees. There's just windows and trees. And there's not even there's actually no experience of me. There's no experience of me looking at the windows and trees. There's just windows and trees. There's no thought about windows and trees. There's no emotion about windows and trees. There's just me and windows and trees, which has qualities of being that go with it. Like there's a simplicity. There's kind of like a blankness that feels really healthy. And I notice a subtle movement of energy in my body. It's kind of like a soft swaying. But see, then that's me reflecting on it for the sake of the video. If I wasn't doing the video, I wouldn't be thinking or noticing any of that. It would just be like trees, window. Now, I know there's more to do. Like I could keep going on this process because I had this little bit left, right? When that is gone, there's just what is around with no, it's pure perception. It's just what is around with no thought about it or reaction to it or response to it even. There's no separation between the movements. So there's nothing like happening in response. It's all just, okay. Thanks for asking that, Kelly. When I go into first arising of awareness, I experience pain and grief and disgust, feeling them with stillness. And it feels like it just will take feeling through that. Yes. Okay. So when you go into first arising of awareness, if there's pain and grief and disgust, there's actually still qualities there. The awareness hasn't fully turned away from the experience, which is fine. You don't have to make yourself do that, because when you go into the grief and pain and disgust, for example, and let's say that you experience that, you let it be there, there's a settling, and then the awareness turns back to the absolute. If there's still experience in the awareness as it's doing that, let's say I turn back to the absolute and I think, oh, this fucking absolute again. It's always there. When is it ever gonna just be gone or whatever? That's a thought, right? That's you're actually, what you're doing is moving from a gross level of awareness to a more subtle level of awareness. And as you do that in your process, eventually you'll come to the witness, which is just this clear, transparent, pure awareness. So if there will be steps into that, and that's fine. You just keep honoring the level of experience and then letting the experience go, as opposed to trying to get in there and like process it and change everything. Also, the gift is usually the pathway to unification. So going into the state of the gift here complexity. Well, the state of the gift for me, in this example, would be simplicity, but I see them both. Like the way I see them is that the shadow is the pathway. Wait, the gift is usually the pathway. Yeah, exactly. So the shadow will take you into the unification, which the first part of that is the gift. And then the full unification is the city. Pain and pleasure as teachers of pure awareness, they bring us into the present moment. Thanks, everybody. I love the engagement, and yeah, I get this creative experience of us moving like this. So I appreciate that. Thank you. I think I'm going to go ahead and end the video. It has been an hour, and I know it can get long for people. So we can continue chatting on the thread if that's comes up. Thank you again for being here. I love you all, and I'll see you soon. Bye.